clear on carnism, because I'm actually a little confused in my mind and a lot of other people. Is carnism something that is apart from our natural genetic appetites for meat? Is it different from how we've grown up for centuries associating meat with sort of wealth? Is it, in other words, is it mostly a belief system that is the result of propaganda and lobbyists, or is it some amalgam of the two?
It's an amalgam. I mean, propaganda and lobbying, only evolved in the past. I meant
of the three actually are sort of genetic appetites and historic inclinations to eating meat, or is it more of a modern phenomenon?
Well, it is true that we've been eating animals, as I said, for millennia, right? So this is a deeply conditioned behavior. And we did start eating animals. People started eating animals because they needed to eat animals in order to survive. And now the practice of eating animals is not a survival practice. I mean, some people cannot make their food choices freely because they're economically or geographically unable to do so. But we've become so conditioned to associate these carnistic products with like satiety and with wellness and the idea of wellness, even though that's not what's happening, that we're conditioned by our society, we're conditioned by the norms in our society, and we're just so used to eating in a certain way. Let me give you an example of this carnistic defense mechanism so that it's clear for people who are listening what I'm talking about. As I mentioned, most people would really be deeply offended if they were exposed to the reality of how animals are raised and killed for food, or just the act of killing animals for food in the first place, even if it's so-called, humane, and that's a whole other conversation. And yet most people support this practice. And so carnism uses these defense mechanisms to keep itself alive, and what they do is they distort our perceptions and disconnect us from our natural empathy toward those animals we've learned to classify as edible.
Who is behind carnism? Like, who is trying to distort?
Well, that's a great question. So carnism as a system, or one could say a system of oppression, an oppressive system, it exists without people having to actively keep it alive because it's existed for so long. It's self-sustaining. It's really institutionalized. So it's woven through, our social institutions. It's like saying who's behind classism, for example, who's behind patriarchy or sexism. It's structured in the same way. However, there are individuals who are actively trying to maintain carnism and keep people participating in a system that they would probably choose not to. And these are the people who run animal agribusinesses, for example, and stand to profit from people continuing to eat animals. So let me give you an example of a defense mechanism. One carnistic defense is de-individualization. We look at farmed animals, those animals we've learned to classify as edible, thinking of them as a pig, for example, as not having any individuality or personality of their own. We learn to believe that a pig is a pig and all pigs are the same, for instance. And this is a defense mechanism because when we don't recognize the individuality of these beings, we don't feel the natural empathy we would otherwise feel when it comes to eating their flesh. Now, carnism is a global phenomenon. In meat-eating cultures around the world, people all learn to classify a small handful of animals as edible, and all the rest they classify as inedible and often disgusting and offensive to consume. So what changes is simply what kind of animal we learn to think of as edible. But members of all cultures tend to think of their own choices as rational and the choices of other cultures as irrational and often disgusting and offensive.
I just see some really great comments coming in. Goldilocks says, I'm sure that if we were taught the truth, if we taught the truth to our children, no one would eat meat. And there's such a much bigger picture to eating meat than I think we realize when we go out to a restaurant and we see that 90% of the entrees can contain animal products.
Yeah, absolutely. And one way to really understand how this phenomenon operates is to imagine that you are biting into a juicy hamburger and your dining companion turns to you and says, actually, you're not eating beef, you're eating a golden retriever. Right, Dan? Right. So your reaction is an example of carnism. You haven't been conditioned to disconnect from your natural empathy for golden retrievers or for dogs, right? Chances are what you just saw as food or thought of as food, you now think of as a dead animal. What you just felt was delicious, you now feel is disgusting. And rather than continuing eating, you want to just throw that away. So you're conditioned to think in a way that affects your feelings, that drives your behaviors. And carnism has conditioned you to feel this way about certain animals, but not all animals.
You know, I think the greatest example of that is a Slim Jim, which is often seen. So I don't know if you've seen a Slim Jim, but it's basically like the worst processed meat, which the World Health Organization classifies in the same category as cigarettes as a known carcinogen, and it's in the candy section, and it's wrapped in this beautiful sort of yellow and red wrapper, and it looks just like this sort of, you know, confection. And you know, really it's basically dead animals, salt and nitrites, you know, which are all super bad for you. And you know, I'm sure nobody thinks about what they're really consuming when they tear that wrapper off.
Absolutely, because the fact of the matter is, and I can say this with some degree of certainty, I've given talks about carnism all around the world. I've been to over 50 countries on 6 continents, and what I see is the same thing over and over and over again, which is that people care. People care about animals, they care about the planet, they care about their own well-being. Most people would never willingly contribute to a system like this. And that's what gives me a lot of hope. And, you know, once people really make the connection, you know, really step outside the carnistic box. And this is why I wrote my book, right? I didn't write my book to talk about why people shouldn't eat animals. I wanted to talk about why we do eat animals in the first place, and to really raise awareness of carnism so people could make their food choices freely, because without awareness, there's no free choice. And when people can step outside of this system to see more clearly and to think more, feel more fully, then they're in a much better position to make healthy food choices for themselves and the planet.
Plant Power Production chimes in that if kids could take a field trip to a slaughterhouse, she thinks everybody'd be vegan.
It would
you
certainly...
show a great, and by the way, in your TED Talk, you show this really heart-wrenching video. You're very cautious and sort of understanding around it, but I think it is important what people see, but what goes on behind that burger, what goes on behind that delicious piece of bacon, what goes on behind that Slim Jim, so they really understand. And I think part of what you're saying with carnism, there's almost a willful effort to cloak the reality of how that meat is produced so we can enjoy it more.
Yeah, that's right. There's a willful effort among some, and we make, you know, the industry's job easier for them. They tell us not to look and we turn away. And so we have to be, you know, becoming aware of, we also, I think, back up, need to become aware of the way carnism conditions us to actually feel defensive against information that would help get us out of the box that we don't realize we're in. So a lot of vegans will say this, and this was certainly my experience before I became vegan, and, you know, from the other side and after I became a vegan. Many people, you know, just hearing the term vegan suddenly feel defensive, and it's, don't tell me that, you'll ruin my meal. And that's because one of the key ways that carnism keeps itself alive is by causing people to feel defensive against anyone or anything that would help them get outside of this carnistic box. And so there's a lot of resistance to the very information that we need to hear if we are going to free ourselves. For example, there are lots of negative vegan stereotypes that cause people to think anything about plant-based eating or veganism is propaganda, is biased. You know, when we don't recognize the bias of the dominant culture, then we call everybody biased who challenges it. Or one stereotype that is very common is that, you know, vegans are animal-loving sentimentalists. They're not rational. They're overly emotional. And, well, you know, a person who's not rational or not emotional, sorry, a person who's too emotional is not rational, and a person who's not rational is not worth listening to. And this is a form of shoot the messenger. If we shoot the messenger, we don't have to take seriously the implications of their message. And these same arguments were used to discredit people who challenged, slavery and challenged women's right to, tried to get women the right to vote. So we have to be very careful to look at these sort of negative stereotypes about people who are challenging the dominant way of eating.
So, you know what? Most of the time at Blue Zones, we try to celebrate the health benefits of eating whole food plant-based. If you're eating a whole food plant-based diet, you're probably living about 6 years longer without the chronic diseases than you would be if you're eating meat every day. We know from the Adventist Health Study, if you follow 103,000 Americans for 30 years, the vegans or the people who are 100% plant-based, they weigh about 20 pounds left. We spend well over $120 billion a year in these sort of diet plans to shed weight. None of them work. None of them work for more than about 3% of the people after a 2-year period. But here, if we just follow the simple edict to eat a whole food plant-based diet, shaves 20 pounds off our weight. I think most people listening here would love that prospect. But you're a Harvard-trained psychologist, and you were telling me before that there's actually psychological benefits to eating plant-based. Could you share a few of those with us?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So it takes a lot of psychological energy to stay unaware of what's right in front of you and what's all around you. It's when we have to keep ourselves unconscious and unaware, it drains some of our energy, and we end up acting against our values and in ways that are really counter to who and how we want to be in the world. I can say for myself, just as an example, I'm a huge foodie, and I think you know this about me, and cooking is my passion, eating is my passion, these two things. And I remember when I became vegetarian way back when, I was really worried about how limited my diet was going to be. And what I have discovered is that I have an ability to connect with my food and a richness of experience when it comes to eating and cooking that I never had before, because I feel very conscious of what I'm doing. I don't have to not look at things that disgust me. I don't have to pick out the vein from the chicken leg that I'm cooking. And there's a wonderful feeling that I have that the way that what I'm putting in my body reflects who and how I want to be in this world. And that feels very good to me. I always think of this quote from the activist Eddie Lama, who said that when he became aware of the atrocity that is carnism, the global atrocity that is carnism, he decided he wanted to stop eating animals. He thought to himself, I'm just one person. It's a drop in the bucket, And he thought, well, animals are they're going to continue to suffer and die, but not because of me. And that feels really important to me.
Plant-based production just writes in that when she went vegan 9 years ago, she got off of Zoloft, which is a depression medicine. So, at least one of the people listening here actually, use vegan instead of pharmaceutical to improve her psychological well-being. Are there any other psychological benefits? I mean, you were saying too that this idea that people are not always receptive to just the healthy benefits of eating a plant-based diet. How does carnism help us make the change?
Well, I think one thing that's important to be aware of is that, for a lot of people, they feel defensive and they feel very guilty. And if I admit that eating animals is, causing harm, that means I'm a harmful, bad person. And it's really important when we recognize carnism, it helps us recognize that good people can participate in harmful practices. That doesn't make them bad people. We're all born into this system. Our choice is not whether we participate, but how we participate. Nevertheless, we need to have a lot of compassion for ourselves, I think, as we work toward change. But when we understand carnism, we can take away this kind of feeling of guilt and maybe shame that we might have for having been a part of the problem, so to speak, and just recognize that we're all influenced and most of us have been deeply, deeply conditioned to behave in this way. It's not our fault that we were born into this system and act in this way.
So I want to address another nuanced question I think a lot of people have. Most people who follow Blue Zones are plant slant. In other words, they're trying to wean themselves off of the meaty, cheesy, eggy diet. We all know these great organizations, the Good Food Institute, Dr. Michael Greger, and Pro Veg, your husband's organization, Neil Barnard's organization. There's lots of great organizations that are really trying to intervene with policy to make it harder and more expensive to eat animal-based food. Now, for those people who want to take a step in the right direction, is it more important for them to go 100% vegan, or do you actually maybe do more good by getting behind some of these organizations that will actually save a lot more animals than you not eating a piece of meat every now and again?
I mean, you're totally right, Dan. The big change needs to happen on an institutional level. So it's really important for, the groups that are working toward institutional change, to changing policy, lobbying, getting corporations, for example, to include plant-based products or switch entirely, ideally, to plant-based products. And, then we have organizations like mine, Beyond Carnism, which is working to shift the psychology, and because institutions are made up of people. And you're absolutely right. Most people don't change and go vegan from one day to the next. Like, whether we're talking about, one-to-one advocacy, or we're talking about getting institutions to change, often when we encourage people or institutions to move gradually or incrementally, we're more likely to get the kind of change we're asking for. I always encourage people to think about, to not, vegans in particular, to not assume that, either you're vegan and you're part of the solution, or you're non-vegan and you're part of the problem. But that we can ask people to become vegan allies, that you don't have to be 100% vegan in order to use your influence to help the transformation of carnism. So some of the people who donate to my organization, Beyond Carnism, for example, they're not vegan. Some of them are not even vegetarian, but they believe in the message. They're working toward veganism. They're, as I say, they're being as vegan as possible, which is what anybody can be anyway. And they're using their influence to help offset, or transform carnism. Some of the people who interview me, journalists for publications that might reach hundreds of thousands or millions of people. They're not vegan, they're not vegetarian, they're vegan allies. They're using their influence toward the transformation of carnism.
Lisa Lynn asked, what's the best way to approach this with her family? Because a lot of people listening here have kids. I mean, how do you introduce the idea to the rest of your family?
That is a really great question, and there's a big answer to that. I actually have a book on this very subject called Beyond Beliefs: A Guide to Improving Relationships and Communication Among Vegans, Vegetarians, and Meat Eaters. And there's a lot of information at that. If you come to veganadvocacy.org, that's our Center for Effective Vegan Advocacy's website, where we have a lot of materials for people who are vegan, who want to promote veganism, who want to learn how to talk about veganism, whether it's with your family or whether it's as a form of advocacy. But, really starting for many people who are vegan, there's this strong feeling of, I have to get the people in my life to become vegan too, because otherwise I can't feel connected with them. It's really hard, if you've made this connection, to sit across the table from somebody you love, watching them put a dead animal's body in their mouth and, not think that there's anything strange about that. It can feel very disconnecting. And when you understand carnism, it helps you understand that person, has been socialized into this system, and this does not mean they're a bad person. And also, you can ask people to be a vegan ally in your life. A lot of times vegans feel like, if the person in my life doesn't go totally vegan, then then forget it. I'll never be able to connect with them. But very often what the vegans need is that the people in their lives are a vegan ally. They need to feel that the people in their lives understand them and really respect them for their decisions and are willing to relate to them in a way that feels safe and healthy for them.
So what would you say is the, let's just say I'm eating a regular standard American diet. and I want to make the first big important step towards the right direction. What do you advise? Besides, actually repeat your website again, because I see a couple people were asking for you to repeat it. So could you repeat your website again?
Well, people can learn more about Carnism at carnism.org, and they can also go to veganadvocacy.org, and that's our project for vegans.
Okay, and then besides going to the website, just right here, what are just maybe 2 or 3 quick ideas that help move us along the continuum away from carnism and more towards eating plant-based?
Yeah, great question. Anyway. Great question. One is raise your own awareness, become aware, understand carnism and the specific mechanisms so that you can be better positioned to not be influenced by them. And at carnism.org, we have a lot of resources for that. On a purely behavioral level, ask yourself at each meal, try to be as vegan as possible instead of saying I have to go vegan, right? How can this meal be as vegan as possible? Try to crowd out food rather than cutting out food, adding more plants to your diet rather than feeling like you have this mindset of like elimination or reduction. And there are some organizations that say if you want to, as you're reducing the amount of animal products or carnistic products in your diet, think about reducing those that cause the most numbers of animals harm, which is fish and chickens. The number of fish and chickens consumed by one individual is a lot higher than the number of, cows, for example, consumed when somebody eats beef. Yeah,
because a cow, one abused cow murdered cow will feed 500 people, and a chicken feeds 2.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
A lot more pain if you're eating chicken, and I would say industrial raised eggs as well, and of course the fish industry. So your book, Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows, was originally published 10 years ago, and now your publisher wants to bring it back. Why now?
Yeah, I mean, we've recently launched the 10th anniversary edition, which is really exciting. It's got a great foreword by Yuval Harari, and we decided to bring the book back now, or my publisher actually decided to bring the book back now, because since 2010, when the book first came out, there's really been a tremendous amount of awareness that has grown of the catastrophic consequences of animal agriculture on the environment. We know that it's a key driver of climate change. On animals, of course, farmed animals, in just 1 hour, more farmed animals are slaughtered than the total number of people, or one day I should say, in the total number of people killed in all wars throughout history.
How many is that?
Just think about that number. It is
millions.
A lot.
Wow.
It's a lot, right? So this is really significant. And we also know that the benefit. We've learned more about the benefits of a plant-based diet and the dangers of eating a carnistic diet. And we also know that animal agriculture, particularly in the form of wet markets and factory farms, is a leading driver of pandemics and other public health problems. So today there's like more awareness than ever before of the problems of animal agriculture. And there's also more awareness of and accessibility for many people anyway of vegan products. And so it's really, this conversation is really now starting to take hold in a whole new way.
I see chiming in here, Embrace Each Day says that veganism is exploding. In fact, I was just reading in the New York Times today, the requests for vegan and vegetarian recipes has grown by 40% in the last year. So obviously, people around the country, at least, or perhaps around the world, are getting the message. Do you have any sort of hopeful statistics on veganism or young people changing their eating habits that would give us optimism that, people are drinking the cappuccino?
Yeah, I don't have the actual statistics, but I can share with you that in the past, let's say 7 years since I've been traveling around extensively around the world to, as I said, over 50 countries on 6 continents, every single place that I have been, without exception, where I've met with people in key positions of leadership in vegan organizations, leading vegan organizations, and also very often in the mainstream media, have said exactly the same thing, that in their particular country, this conversation about moving toward plant-based or vegan diets has just been exploding. And they'll say something like, it's only been in the past 3 years or 5 years, or in some cases 10 years. But I have not seen an exception to this, and it's very, very heartening for me.
Yeah, I see. Embrace Each Day writes and says that 3 trillion animals are killed every year, which is absolutely stunning given, I guess there's only 8 billion people on the planet. It means we're eating a hell of a lot of other creatures. I remember I read a statistic that the average adult pig has the intelligence, the IQ of a 3-year-old human being. And it lives its entire life in this horrible cage that's, imagine sitting in a middle seat on Delta Airline next to the bathroom, where it shits in a grate. It has to inhale its own ammonia fumes until its young gets ripped away from it. And then it meets a horrible death 3 years later, just so we can enjoy a bacon or pork chop. And when you think of it in that terms, and all the cholesterol and the saturated fat and the hormones, and I just think there'll be a time when we look back at our meat eating habit with the same disdain that we look at slavery, and that'll be a truly enlightened and better world.
Yeah. I mean, it's very well said. I mean, we're so conditioned to see this situation as normal, the way that we treat other animals, putting their bodies in our mouths as normal, that it's hard for us, the people who haven't stepped out of that, to recognize, just how horrific it actually is when you think about it. When you substitute a dog for a pig, for instance, it snaps you out of the carnistic cocoon that you're in for a moment and gives you a sense of just how distorted your perceptions have to be thinking in this way, where, somebody's legs are essentially appetizing. A good example of this is what I call, this kind of newer move toward what's called humane, quote unquote, humane meat, eggs, or dairy, which I actually think for many people are, wanting to contribute less, to reduce their contribution to suffering. They're wanting to vote with their dollar or their euro. And so this whole idea of eating so-called humanely raised and killed animals, it makes a lot of sense, and is actually a good sign that consumers are caring and waking up. And nevertheless, it is a PR stunt, essentially, of animal agribusiness. If you think about the irrationality of it, by stepping outside of carnism, it can help you recognize how there is no such thing as so-called humane animal products or carnistic products. So, for example, most people would consider it cruel to slaughter a happy, healthy golden retriever just because people like the way her legs taste. And yet when the exact same thing is done to individuals of other species, we're expected to call that compassionate or humane. It's just completely bizarre. And in some ways, it's even worse to kill somebody who's happy and who wants to keep living and is leaving behind friends. So things are changing. It's, 2 steps forward, 1 step backward. But thanks to conversations like this, and so many people are doing such great work in the world around to raise consciousness of this issue. I mean, and you're outspoken and you're vocal, and you're really helping people think about the health benefits of plant slant and eating plant-based. It's very heartening to me to see the great work that's being done in the world.
Well, I know we're wrapping up here, but I want to take 5 more minutes for those of you listening. If you have a question for Melanie, I'll monitor here and pass it on. I do want to address something I just saw come across the feed, and that's the fact that in blue zones, people did eat a little bit of meat. They did eat a little bit of fish. On average, they were eating meat only 5 times a month. So think about that. That was about meat once a week. And I hasten to point out, we don't know if people lived a long time in blue zones because of that meat or in spite of that meat. We don't know. I do know that the longest lived women in the history of the world come from Okinawa, Japan, about 30 times more female centenarians among a cohort of women over 60 than any place else in the world. Until about 1980, they were 98 to 99% wholly plant-based. So, I mean, effectively vegan and living the longest. So I have taken the stance with blue zones. I know that outside people's blue zones world, they're going to eat what they want. But I've taken a stance leading the organization that when you're in sort of the blue zone sphere of influence, you're only eating whole food, plant-based. So my book, The Blue Zone Kitchen or Blue Zone Solution, all the recipes in there are plant-based, whole food plant-based, which by the way is about 90 to 95% of what people really ate. Meat was mostly a food that were consumed at a wedding or a birthday. You know, it's sad that it's so tied, you know, the pain and suffering of another creature is so tied to human celebration, but that's the way it is. Here's a question. What advice would you give to a 16-year-old advocating veganism? Melanie?
Yeah, well, first of all, that's just so wonderful to hear. When I was 16, I was so far from advocating anything. And I love it when I hear of young people who are really thinking about the world, you know, and wanting to have these conversations. I would give the same advice that I would give to anybody advocating veganism, which is, number one, recognize that, you know, what you're asking for is very much in alignment with people's values, and what you're asking for or advocating can put you in a position where you're experiencing a lot of defensiveness, and it can be hard to live as a vegan in a dominant animal eating culture because, you know, vegans don't see different things. We see the same things differently, and what we see can be hard to take in. And what we hear about ourselves from the dominant culture sometimes can be hard to take in. So I would say, you know, get educated and learn about effective advocacy. You can do that at veganadvocacy.org. On our website, we have a new online series of courses to help train advocates, and take care of yourself. Practice compassion toward yourself the way that you want others to be practicing compassion toward other animals. Because it does take a lot of effort, it takes energy, it takes a lot of courage to be living and speaking your truth in a culture that is organized in a way that is not receptive in some ways to this message. So take good care of yourself and practice a lot of self-compassion.
There's somebody wrote in, but wait a minute, there are passages in the Bible that suggest that human beings have dominion over animals. So humans ought to be able to do what they want with animals for their, you know, for their well-being and, you know, improving their temple. I mean, do you know what I'm talking about here? Or what this?
Yeah, I do. I understand this. And I mean, it's interesting because people, you know, debate the Bible. People who are biblical scholars debate the meanings of different passages and in different places in the Bible. What I would say is that there's no religion, to my knowledge, certainly not Christianity, that prohibits people from practicing compassion. In fact, just the opposite. I've never known somebody who said, I really want to be vegan and I practice more compassion toward animals, but my religion forbids it, or God forbids it. So I would say there are some great groups out there. Just do a Google search. There's, I think it's the Catholic Vegan Association, Christians for Animal Rights. There are groups that are actually speaking to this very issue to help people decipher some of this messaging within their own religion.
That's fantastic. So just in wrapping up here, where can people learn more about Carnism, and what do you want to leave people with who want to make a difference or interact with your organization?
Yeah, thank you so much. They can come to carnism.org, learn more about Carnism, and also learn about the Center for Effective Vegan Advocacy if you want to improve your communication and talking about veganism, or just, you know, learn more about these issues in general, about Carnism and about, you know, moving toward veganism. So carnism.org is a main website to come visit. And you know, I want to just say a big thank you. Thank you there are a lot of people here, and it's always so heartening to me to see the comments and to see how many people are like choosing to be a part of this kind of, I think, very important, critical conversation. And thank you to you, Dan. You're just doing a great job of awareness raising in a world very much in need.
Well, and I also want to thank you, Melanie, for bringing this important topic to light. To, I think, illuminating my audience or my followers here. I've been monitoring the feeds, and I don't remember when I've gotten better engagement and more people kind of giving us a high five or giving you a high five for your work. I am going to post this entire interview on Blue Zones and at DanBuettner if you want to view it or share it with your friends. Melanie, could you remind us one more time what your Instagram handle is And I imagine you'll be happy to answer questions sent to your direct message, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They can send them to Dr. Melanie Joy. That's the Instagram handle here. And they can come to our website, which is my organization is called Beyond Carnism. Our mission is to expose and transform carnism globally and help create a more just and compassionate relational world for all beings. They can come to carnism.org, and they can also contact us through that.
Fantastic. Melanie, I'm giving you a big telephonic hug here. And for all of you following who took the last 47 minutes to join us, yes, giving you a hug, and why we love dog, eat pigs, and where cows should be on every bookshelf. I love you all, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Ciao,
Bye-bye.
ciao.